In a remote village nestled between misty mountains and quiet streams, there lived a young man named Riku. The village was peaceful. Birds sang in the morning, the wind played with the bamboo, and the villagers moved with quiet rhythm. But inside Riku, there was a constant unrest. To those who passed him by, Riku looked content. He worked hard, smiled gently, and spoke with kindness. But when night fell and silence filled his room, his thoughts grew loud. His mind became a storm of memories, doubts, regrets, and a strange heaviness he couldn't explain. No matter how still the world outside was, something inside him wouldn't settle. He tried meditation. He tried to stay busy. He read books. He listened to advice. But the heaviness remained. It followed him like a shadow, not always loud, but always there. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, Riku stepped out of his small home and walked toward the forest path. The air was cool, the earth damp with morning dew. His footsteps were slow but steady. He wasn't sure why, but he knew where he was going. At the edge of the forest, where the trees opened into a stone path, stood the old temple. It had been there longer than anyone could remember. Some said the monk who lived there had once been a traveler. Others said he had never left those mountains. Riku approached the temple gate and bowed. He waited in silence. Moments later, an elderly monk emerged, his steps soft, his face still, as if carved from peace itself. Riku looked up and spoke, his voice quiet but full of weight. "Master, I don't know what's wrong. I try to live well, to think kindly, to be at peace. But something inside me never rests. It's like I'm carrying something I can't see." The monk looked into Riku's eyes and said nothing. Instead, he turned and motioned for the young man to follow. They walked in silence. Past the gate, down a narrow stone path, through a garden where the wind moved slowly between rows of moss-covered lanterns. The temple grounds were quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of a small stream nearby. Riku's eyes wandered, but his mind stayed fixed on the weight in his chest. The monk led him beneath a cherry blossom tree, its branches heavy with pale petals that trembled with every breeze. He gestured toward a wooden bench, and they both sat. Still, no words. Riku waited. He expected wisdom to come quickly, maybe a phrase, maybe a parable. But the monk only looked at him with the stillness of someone who had long since stopped rushing. Finally, the monk spoke. "What is it?" he asked softly, "that you believe you're carrying?" Riku looked down at his hands. "I don't know," he admitted. "Sometimes it feels like sadness. Other times it's frustration, guilt, maybe. And sometimes it's nothing. Just this constant weight." The monk nodded slowly. "We do not always carry objects," he said. "Sometimes we carry people, not in our hands, but in our minds, in our energy, in our memories." Riku looked up. His eyes sharpened, just slightly. "People?" he asked. "You mean the people around me?" The monk shook his head. "Not just around you. People from your past. People who shaped you, hurt you, filled you with doubt, or made you forget yourself. People who have long since walked away, but still live quietly inside you." He picked up a fallen petal from the bench beside him and let it drop into Riku's palm. "Some of them you no longer need to carry." Riku closed his hand around the petal. Something in his chest stirred. "And if I don't know who they are?" he asked. "That," the monk said with a small smile, "is what we are going to find out." If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next. The monk stood up and motioned toward a narrow path behind the tree. "Come," he said gently. "There's something I want to show you." They walked together until they reached a small wooden bridge stretched over a still pond. The water was dark and glass-like, reflecting the gray sky and branches above it. The monk reached into the sleeve of his robe and pulled out 5 small stones, smooth and round. He placed them in Riku's hand, one by one. "Each of these," he said, "represents a person many of us carry. And if we hold on to them for too long, we lose the space where peace was meant to live." He pointed at the first stone. "The first is the doubter. This is the person who constantly questioned your dreams, your worth, or your ability. Sometimes it was with words, other times just with a look." Riku tightened his grip slightly. "Their voice may not be near you anymore, but it lives in your mind, whispering hesitation every time you try to move forward." The monk dropped the stone into the pond. It made a deep, soft splash, and the ripples spread wide across the surface. "Let them go," he said. "They have already said enough." He pointed at the second stone. "This one is the taker, the one who only came to you in moments of need, who praised you when it served them, then disappeared when your cup was empty. They took your energy, your kindness, your time, but gave nothing in return." The monk paused. "Kindness is a gift, but kindness without boundaries becomes self-betrayal." He let the second stone fall into the water. Another splash, another ripple. Riku stared at the pond, quiet, but inside, names and faces had begun to stir. The monk turned to the third stone. "And this," he said with more weight in his voice, "is the one most people carry without realizing it." He held it up before dropping it. "The outgrown. Someone you once needed, once loved, once aligned with, but now no longer do. Still, you carry them, out of guilt, loyalty, or fear of change." The water trembled again as the third stone disappeared beneath the surface. "Not every connection is meant to last forever," the monk said, "and some threads must be untied so you can breathe again." The monk held the fourth stone a little longer in his palm. He didn't speak right away. The wind moved softly through the trees, brushing fallen leaves across the wooden planks beneath their feet. "This one," he said finally, "is the wound." Riku looked up, and the monk's gaze had shifted. Deeper now, more still. "The person who hurt you, who betrayed you, who spoke to you with cruelty, or left without explanation. Their words might have faded, but their impact hasn't." He paused, then continued. "You think about them often, not because you miss them, but because you're still waiting for a moment that never came. An apology, an explanation, a reason." Riku felt his breath slow. The monk let the stone drop into the pond. "To forgive," he said softly, "is not to excuse. It is to remove the knife from your own heart, so you stop bleeding every time their memory touches you." They stood in silence for a long moment, as the ripples settled once again. Then the monk lifted the final stone. "This last one," he said, "is the heaviest." He turned the stone slowly in his fingers, then looked at Riku. "It is you, or rather, the version of you that no longer exists, but you refuse to let go." Riku blinked. "The self you compare everything to, the one who never failed, who never got hurt, who always had control. You carry him like a standard, and punish yourself for not being him anymore." The monk placed the stone in Riku's hand instead of throwing it. "You must decide when to release him, because as long as you cling to who you were, you cannot meet who you are becoming." Riku stared at the stone in his palm. It looked like the others, plain, gray, silent, but it felt heavier than them all. If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Riku stood in silence, the last stone resting in his palm. It was warm now, not from the sun, but from his own hand, from how tightly he had held it. He looked down at it, and then at the pond. The surface was still once again, the ripples from the earlier stones long faded. It was a mirror now, calm, unbothered, deep. The monk spoke gently behind him. We spend our lives trying to carry things that were never meant to be permanent. People, memories, versions of ourselves. We hold on because we're afraid of what we might lose. He stepped closer. But we forget that in doing so, we lose something else. Space. Riku turned to him, quietly listening. You are not supposed to carry everyone. You are not supposed to stay who you were. That heaviness in your chest, it's not weakness. It's the weight of what you no longer need. The monk knelt by the edge of the pond, picked up a twig, and gently stirred the surface. Peace, he said, is not something you add. It's what returns when you subtract, when you let go of the unnecessary, the painful, the expired. He drew a slow circle in the water with the twig. You don't have to throw them all away with anger, he added. You can thank them, you can learn from them, and then you let them go. Riku stared at the water, where the circle spread wide, then faded. In that moment, he realized peace wasn't something distant. It had always been trying to reach him, but there was no room for it to land. Not yet. He looked back at the stone in his hand, still holding on. The pond was still again. The monk stood and stepped back, giving Riku space. Riku looked down at the final stone one last time, the one that represented the version of himself he had been clinging to, the version that never made mistakes, that never hurt, that never broke. But that version didn't exist anymore, and maybe that was okay. He closed his eyes, took a slow, full breath, then stepped forward. With both hands, he lowered the stone into the pond, not with force, not with sorrow, just release. The stone sank without a splash. The water accepted it quietly, like it was never meant to be held in the first place. Riku remained still. The silence wasn't empty now. It was full of air, of lightness, of possibility. He turned toward the monk, who simply nodded. No need to speak, the monk said. Stillness will do the rest. Riku bowed, deeper than before, not out of formality, but out of gratitude, not just to the monk, but to himself, for finally letting go. He walked away from the pond, not faster, not stronger, just lighter. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. He felt like he was returning to himself. What have you been carrying for too long? It's okay. You don't have to name them. Just acknowledge it.